The storm outside the remote naval outpost howled like an angry beast, rattling the thin metal siding of the mess hall. Inside, however, the atmosphere was almost painfully alive. A platoon of SEALs, exhausted, mud-stained, and still vibrating with adrenaline, poured through the double doors in a noisy wave. Trays clattered, chairs scraped, and bursts of laughter ricocheted off the walls like stray gunfire. It had been a brutal training day. 12 miles of rough terrain, cold surf plunges, and full kit drills that made their lungs burn. But SEALs lived for that sort of punishment. They joked through the pain, laughed through the fatigue, and celebrated the fact that they were still standing. At the far corner of the room, however, the mood was different. An elderly janitor moved slowly across the floor, pushing an old mop with long, deliberate strokes. He wore faded fatigues that looked as though they belonged to a different era. The colors washed out, the stitching worn thin. His boots were cracked around the edges, soles softened with time. His posture was slightly hunched, but his hands were strong. Scarred. The kind of hands that had once done something far more dangerous than clean up spilled gravy. Most of the young SEALs barely noticed him. He blended into the background like part of the furniture, quiet, unassuming, easy to overlook. Except to Mason Briggs. Briggs was the loudest personality in Alpha Platoon. Big voice, big muscles, big ego. The kind of man who filled a room simply by walking into it. And today, after surviving a particularly miserable training circuit, he was riding high on adrenaline and bravado. "Hey, Gramps," Briggs shouted, pointing with his fork. "You missed a spot over here." A ripple of laughter followed. A few SEALs chuckled, others rolled their eyes. They knew Briggs. Sometimes funny, sometimes annoying. Always trying to be the center of attention. The old man didn't flinch. He kept his eyes down and continued mopping. But Briggs wasn't done. He swaggered across the room. Tray balanced cockily on one hand. When he reached the old janitor, he nudged the mop with the toe of his boot. "You deaf, old-timer. I said you missed a spot. Briggs." "Leave him alone," someone muttered, but Briggs ignored it. "Seriously," he said, turning his grin toward the audience behind him. "What do you use to be before janitor duty? A cook? Barber? What was your rank back in the day?" A few SEALs shifted uncomfortably. Something about teasing an old man didn't sit right, but they didn't intervene. Briggs leaned in closer. "Well, what rank were you?" The mop stopped mid-stroke. The old man slowly raised his head. His eyes, sharp, cold, and unblinking, locked onto Briggs with a force no one expected. Conversations died. Forks froze in mid-air. The mess hall fell into a silence so sudden it felt unreal. Then the old man spoke, voice calm and steady. "Master Chief Special Warfare Operator. Team 3. Retired." The words hit the room like a grenade. Briggs' mouth fell open. Several SEALs straightened instinctively. Someone whispered a curse under their breath. A Master Chief SEAL. The highest enlisted rank in naval special warfare. And he had been pushing a mop in the corner the whole time. The storm outside seemed to howl louder, but inside, no one made a sound. The old man simply lowered his gaze again and resumed mopping, as if he hadn't just shaken the entire room to its core. Rumors spread through the outpost like wildfire. By the next morning, every man on base, from the commanding officers to the lowest, ranking recruit, had heard the same impossible story. The quiet janitor was once a Master Chief SEAL from Team 3. No one knew whether to believe it, but one thing was clear: the old man carried himself differently now. Not arrogantly, not proudly, but with a certain gravity. A man who had already lived several lifetimes' worth of battles. Briggs hadn't slept. The old man's eyes haunted him. Eyes that carried miles of loss and a lifetime of violence. Eyes that could silence a room without uttering a threat. Briggs spent the morning fidgeting through drills, missing cues, earning glares from his teammates. "Dude," "What's wrong with you?" Ramos finally asked. Briggs didn't answer. He didn't know how to explain it. He had teased plenty of people before, but this time he felt like he'd kicked dirt onto the grave of someone who had sacrificed more than he ever would. By noon, curiosity gnawed at him so badly he couldn't ignore it. He found the old veteran behind the mess hall, sitting on an overturned crate, staring out at the gray waves of the Pacific. The sea mist clung to his clothes, softening the creases in his weathered face. He looked like a man who belonged to the ocean, a man carved by it. Briggs approached slowly. "Sir, don't call me that," the veteran murmured without looking away from the horizon. "Master Chief, then. I'm not that anymore either." The wind carried the words away before Briggs could reply. They sounded final. Heavy. Briggs shifted awkwardly. "I wanted to apologize. Yesterday I acted like a young man," the old veteran finished gently. "Young men bark because they don't know yet what silence can mean." Briggs blinked. "That doesn't make much sense to me." The veteran finally turned. His gaze was calm but burdened. "It will." A long quiet settled between them before Briggs dared ask the question that had been burning in his mind. "What happened to you?" The veteran inhaled slowly, the kind of breath that gathers decades of memories. "I served 27 years, he began. Fought in places you've never heard of. Buried men who deserved more life than I did. And near the end, I led a covert recon unit during an operation overseas." His voice dipped lower. Command said it would be clean. Quick. No resistance. He shook his head. It wasn't. A flash. Gunfire ripping the night. Sand exploding under mortar fire. Men screaming for cover. A radio hissing with lies. Briggs could almost see it through the Master Chief's eyes. "We were sold a false mission," the veteran continued. "Bad intel. Maybe intentional. Team 3 walked into a kill zone. Half my boys didn't make it out." His jaw trembled slightly, barely noticeable unless one looked closely. "And when the dust settled, someone had to take the blame." "Your command did that to you," Briggs whispered. "They called it necessary. I called it betrayal." The veteran looked at his scarred hands. "So I walked away from the Navy. From everything." Briggs didn't know what to say. Betrayal wasn't something SEALs joked about. Brotherhood was sacred. To break it was unforgivable. The old man turned back to the ocean. "I came here because no one asks questions on an outpost like this," he murmured. A place for ghosts to fade. Briggs felt something heavy settle inside his chest. A mixture of guilt, sorrow, and a dawning understanding. The janitor wasn't a forgotten man. He was a buried one. For days after hearing the veteran's story, Briggs found himself moving through training like a ghost. He hit every mark, ran every drill, but his mind wasn't on any of it. His teammates noticed the shift immediately. He wasn't cracking jokes. He wasn't loud. He wasn't trying to be the center of attention. He trained harder, spoke less, and carried a look that made the others uneasy. "Briggs, you okay?" Ramos asked during weapons cleaning. "Yeah," he said without looking up. "Just thinking. That's what worries me." Ramos joked, but Briggs didn't smile. The truth was simple. He couldn't stop thinking about the old man's story. The mission gone wrong, the betrayal, the losses. Briggs wasn't naive. He knew the military wasn't perfect. But throwing a Master Chief under the bus, letting him rot on a forgotten base with a mop in hand, that was something he couldn't stomach. One evening, when the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the outpost, Briggs found the veteran again. The old man sat outside the barracks, sharpening a pocketknife with small, deliberate motions. The rhythm was steady, almost meditative. Briggs approached quietly. "You always sit alone." The old veteran didn't look up. Easier that way. Briggs sat down beside him anyway. For a long moment, neither said a word. The wind tugged at their sleeves, carrying the faint smell of salt and diesel. Finally, Briggs spoke. "Why didn't you fight harder to clear your name? Why'd you just disappear?" The veteran paused mid-stroke. His eyes stayed fixed on the blade. "When enough doors close," he said. "You stop knocking." "That's not good enough," Briggs muttered. The veteran's gaze finally lifted. There was no anger in his eyes, only exhaustion. "Son, I fought for months. I filed appeals. I asked for hearings. They buried every request, every memo, every truth. I had no power left. Sometimes walking away is the only way to stay alive." Briggs clenched his fists. "But they ruined you." "No," the old man said quietly. "They took my rank, my career. But they didn't ruin me." The conviction in his voice surprised Briggs. "You sound like you don't even care." "Oh, I care," the veteran answered. "But I learned long ago, revenge isn't always about hurting someone back. Sometimes it's about outliving the pain." Briggs stared at him, jaw tight. "You shouldn't have had to outlive anything. You should have had justice." The veteran chuckled hollowly. "Justice." He returned to sharpening the blade. "Justice doesn't come for old ghosts like me." Briggs shook his head. "I don't accept that. Not for you." A flicker of emotion crossed the old man's face. Disbelief, maybe gratitude, maybe fear of hoping again. "You're stubborn," he murmured. "Damn right," Briggs said. "And I'm a SEAL. We fix things, right? We don't walk away." The veteran wiped the knife clean and looked out at the horizon. "Son, there are battles you can't win." Briggs leaned forward. "Maybe you couldn't win them alone. But you're not alone now." The wind fell quiet for a moment, as though listening. The old man looked at Briggs with an expression somewhere between warning and wonder. "You don't know what you're getting yourself into." Briggs met his gaze without flinching. "Maybe not. But I know this. No one who served the way you did deserves to fade away like this." Slowly, painfully, the veteran nodded. And for the first time since Briggs had met him, the old man didn't look like a ghost. He looked like someone who might finally believe he wasn't forgotten. Briggs attacked the mission of restoring the veteran's honor with the same ferocity he brought to combat drills. This time, however, the battlefield wasn't sand or surf. It was paperwork, records, and buried truths. He spent nights poring over old archives, digging through fragmentary mission reports, and chasing down anyone who had ever served with the Master Chief. Ramos caught him hunched over his laptop one night in the rec room. "You studying for a promotion board?" "No," Briggs muttered. "Studying for justice." A word spread through the platoon. Soon, other SEALs joined in. They combed through dusty storage rooms, old hard drives, forgotten after action reports. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth emerged. Survivors from the ill-fated operation were tracked down. Some were retired, some wounded, some living quiet lives far away. Almost every one of them said the same thing. Master Chief didn't fail us. He saved who he could. He warned command the intel was bad. He should have been commended, not condemned. Briggs compiled every testimony, every scrap of evidence, every fragment of truth. What started as a personal act of redemption grew into a platoon-wide crusade. At last, Briggs presented everything to the base commander, a stoic man who prided himself on protocol above all else. Briggs expected a fight. Instead, after reading the first few pages, the commander's expression softened. "Why wasn't this corrected years ago?" he muttered. "Because nobody cared enough to look," Briggs replied. The commander exhaled heavily. "Well, we care now. It took time, weeks of calls, verifications, hearings, signatures. But eventually Washington gave its answer. The Master Chief's name would be restored, his record corrected, his honors reinstated. And so, On a cold morning beneath a sky the color of steel, the entire base was ordered to the parade ground. No one knew what was coming, except for Briggs and the commander. The veteran arrived late, mop still in hand, confusion written across his face, when he saw the formation of personnel. His gaze swept across the sea of uniforms, then froze when he saw Briggs standing at the front in full dress blues. "What is this?" the old man whispered. "Something long overdue," Briggs said, stepping forward. A Navy captain approached with a small velvet box in his gloved hands. "Master Chief," he said loudly, voice echoing across the silent field, "Orn injustice was committed against you. Today, the United States Navy sets it right." He opened the box. Ribbons gleamed in the morning light, metals polished to perfection, and at the very bottom, the Master Chief's golden anchor. The veteran staggered as though struck. I don't understand." Briggs stepped closer. His voice was strong, steady, sure. "We found the truth. Your men told the truth, and now the world knows it too." Silence hung heavy. Then the veteran's eyes filled, not with pride alone, but with decades of buried grief finally rising to the surface. Hands trembling, he reached for the insignia, and every SEAL in formation snapped a salute. The old man swallowed hard. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking. "Thank you all." A Briggs leaned in, speaking so only the veteran could hear. "They tried to erase you," he said. "But you're still here. That's the sweetest revenge." If for the first time in years, the old Master Chief stood tall. Not a janitor, not a ghost, but the warrior he had always been. And the entire base stood with him.